Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm Keith Downey, your host, and very excited to introduce Morning Joy's brand new Monday segment, Sacred Sites with Steve Ray, where we'll explore the holy and historical significance of these sacred sites. And what better person to lead such an endeavor than an expert in biblical history and pilgrimage, Steve Ray. Wow, good morning, and welcome to the show, Steve.
Good morning, Keith, and everybody at Guadalupe Radio. I've admired you guys for 15 years and been a part of a lot of things you're doing, and this is very exciting for me to join this segment every Monday because I've traveled, I think, to 95% of all the places that the Bible mentions, been there, and I love to share it. I love it. I just love to teach and share the Bible, so this is going to be great fun for all of us, I think.
Well, we can't thank you enough for sharing it with the general audience here, because a lot of people aren't able to make some of these pilgrimages, and you're bringing it to the radio and to people's homes, people's cars. So I know when we first talked about this edition of Sacred Sites, you pretty much won me over when you started talking about cake. So maybe expand to us about this Bethlehem cake.
Well, the reason we called this first show the Bethlehem Cake is because we're coming up on Christmas, and I thought the first 4 shows we do would be centered around Bethlehem, so people can get an idea of the whole setting for the Christmas season and the place where Jesus was born. But there's a lot more that happened in Bethlehem than just the birth of Jesus. And so what I wanted to do is take the whole layers of history of Bethlehem. I want to pretend we're on my bus, because I've done this over 100 times with pilgrims, driving between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And while we're on our way, I always tell the story of the birthday cake of Bethlehem, meaning all of the different layers. Now, when you're doing archaeology, there's a thing called a tell. And it doesn't mean to tell somebody something. It means a civilization, layers. Here's an example of one. It has all the different layers, and those different colors are different civilizations over time. And so it's like it's a big mound. And as you slice through the mound, you see the first civilization and another one built on top of that. And then somebody destroys it and builds again on top of that. So it's like a big birthday cake. And when you cut the layers, you see all those layers of history. So when I'm on the bus with our groups and we're driving to Bethlehem, it's about 5 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, I explain to them all the levels of history that they're going to be walking in that day, because we're going to be spending the whole day in Bethlehem. And for us, we're going to be spending these 4 shows on Bethlehem. So let's walk through the layers of history real quickly and get an idea of the biblical importance, the historical importance of Bethlehem, and it's really fascinating, actually, and it's all the way through the Bible, starting in Genesis all the way through the birth of Christ. So what I'd start out with is 4,000 years ago, a man named Jacob, the grandson of Abraham. Abraham came we're going to talk about him in the next shows, came all the way over 1,000 miles from what's Iraq of today. And I've been all over there. We'll do all of those places too in the future, all those places in Iraq. My wife and I have been there. And he traveled all the way to what was called Canaan, which is today called the state of Israel. And he had a son, Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob. And they just lived in this land. They didn't own it yet. And he was traveling one time through Jerusalem on the very same road we're driving on right now, by the way. It's called the Hebron Road. And that Hebron Road takes you all the way through Bethlehem, through Hebron, another 15 miles. And then it's 50 miles. You get all the way down into the Negev desert to a city called Beersheba. And that's actually where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived most of their life, way down in the Negev desert. You're getting close to the Red Sea in Egypt when you're down there. So anyway, Jacob is traveling through Jerusalem, and his wife and him and the families on camels. And as soon as he gets near the entrance of Bethlehem, his wife, Rachel, is very, very pregnant, 9 months pregnant. And she goes into a very hard labor. She gets off her camel. These women were tough back in those days, riding a camel. But we also got to remember Mary. We'll get to her in a minute. She did the same thing. But she gets off her camel at the entrance to Bethlehem. And this is in Genesis chapter 35. And it says she gave birth to a son named Benjamin, but she died. She died in childbirth, and they buried her on the side of the road. And that tomb, by the way, 4,000 years later, is still there. you can still go and see the tomb of Rachel. It's now a synagogue. And if you want to see it, it's in my David and Solomon movie that I made. We went in that and filmed in there. And so now, whenever you go from Jerusalem down to Bethlehem, you pass the tomb of Rachel. She's buried there. That's 4,000 years ago. And that was 2,000 years before Jesus was coming in the womb of Mary. And don't think that Joseph didn't look over and see that tomb and say, oh, my goodness, our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother died here, 9 months pregnant. And my wife is now 9 months pregnant. And we're coming into Bethlehem, and we don't even have a place to stay. And you'd say, oh, you don't have to worry because God's going to take care of that baby. But don't forget that the angel said to Herod, Herod's going to kill the baby. Quickly flee to Egypt. So there was danger, and Joseph was a caretaker. But that's the first level of history that we see, is that death of Rachel. Now we come about, it's now maybe 500-600 years later, and we come to a woman named Ruth. And I don't have time to go through that whole story, but we'll do that on another show. But Ruth is from Moab, on the other side of the Jordan River. She's a foreigner, and she comes with her mother, Naomi, and they live there. And she ends up marrying Boaz in the fields of Bethlehem. And they have a son named Obed. And on the bus, I have time, I always ask, all right, I stand up and I say to microphone, does anybody know who Boaz and Ruth's son was? And usually I have about one person that sheepishly goes, Obed? Yes, it is Obed. And Obed has a son named Jesse. I named my son Jesse. My son is named Jesse. And then Jesse has a son named David. And David is the great grandson of Ruth and Boaz. Now that they live there, and they're wheat farmers, and they have wheat. Now David comes along. He's the great grandson. He's not great I think great grandson. Now he's living as growing up in Bethlehem with his father Jesse, and they're shepherds, and they have sheep out in the field. And David goes out. He's the little guy. He's like the little runt. He's the youngest one. So the youngest one always gets the dirty jobs. And he has to go out into the fields. And that's called Shepherd's Field today. And we're going to go there in 2 weeks. I'm going to take you to Shepherd's Field right before the birth of Jesus. But outside, it's 2 miles outside of Bethlehem. And it's all these fields. And they used to take the sheep out there. In fact, you can still see sheep out there today. And we have Mass in the cave where they kept those sheep. We'll go there too. We got a lot of fun stuff we're going to do in the weeks ahead. And so David now, he's the shepherd out there, little boy, and Samuel comes and anoints him to be the king of Israel. And he goes about one half a day walk, maybe 10 miles west to a valley called the Elah Valley. And there he kills Goliath. That's just a half a day's walk from Bethlehem. We've been there many times. And so David, then he becomes the king of Israel. So there's the next level. You've got Jacob and Rachel, Ruth and Boaz, and David the shepherd. He now becomes the king. And then Israel grows and they conquer the land, and Solomon. But then 700 years before Christ, we have the next layer of history. And that is a prophet named Micah. And he prophesies 700 years before the birth of Christ, 300 years after David. And he says this, but you, O Bethlehem Ephratah. Ephratah is another name for Bethlehem, by the way. It has two names. O you, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, but from you shall come the one who is to be the great ruler, who is going forth as of old from ancient days. From old of ancient days is their way of saying eternal, forever. They didn't have the same kind of words to describe those things, but he's coming forth from of old. And this is the Messiah who's going to come. He's going to be the ruler of God's people. And guess who that is? That's going to be Jesus, who is called the son of David. Because when you follow David's family tree, you come to Joseph. That is 1,000 years later, because David was 3,000 years ago for us. And so 1,000 years later, you can follow that family tree. The Jews are very careful to keep track of those things. We Americans, we don't even know where our great-grandparents are buried, but these people never forget those things. And remember, they still know where Rachel was buried 2,000 years earlier. So Micah prophesies, and Joseph is in that line, and then Jesus is born. not biological son of Joseph, but he's adopted. And when you go through adoption in the Jewish culture, you have all the rights and prerogatives of a natural born son. So Jesus inherits the tribe of Judah, which is the kingly tribe. It's represented by a lion. Even today, the Jerusalem flag, as you're flying and as you're driving through Jerusalem, you see two flags. One is the flag of Israel with the Star of David on it, who we're talking about. And the other one is a flag with a lion. That's the Lion of Judah. It's the flag of Jerusalem. Still today, the Lion of Judah. So now Micah prophesies this, and 700 years later, Mary and Joseph are up in Nazareth, and she's now 9 months pregnant, and they have to travel 100 miles. People don't realize how far it was to get from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. That's a 100 miles, and they didn't jump on a Mercedes bus like we're driving in. And so I always say to our group, and don't forget, Mary is still walking. We're driving down air-conditioned bus. It's just lovely, comfortable seats. Stop at rest areas. There were no rest areas back then. You found a bush. And so they're driving along, and I keep saying as we're driving along that don't forget, Mary and Joseph are still walking. Maybe on a camel. Maybe on a donkey. We don't know. We'll talk about that next week. Maybe on a donkey, we don't know. But even if it's a donkey, that's just as bad. I don't know whether I'd rather walk or ride a donkey. They're both. Well, anyway, then Jesus is born, and then the early pilgrims come, and Constantine builds a church over the place where Jesus was born. And now 4,000 years later, we're on a bus. We're going to Bethlehem, and we're the last layer of that birthday cake. And it's fun sharing with you all the history of Bethlehem right there.
Absolutely incredible, Steve Ray. Thank you so much for taking us on that virtual pilgrimage, that birthday Bethlehem cake. That was incredible. Now, coming up next Monday, that's December 16th, we're going to be talking about the tour of the Nativity, then and now, correct? Absolutely. Well, can't thank you enough. Make sure to visit his website. Visit CatholicConvert.com, right? Perfect. And then, yes, we'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern, here on Morning Joy, where truth matters. And remember, God bless, and make it a joyful day. We'll see you.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.